Hey guys, in this lesson we're going to talk a little bit about research. Now, hopefully over the course of this Maymester session you've already been doing a lot of research, and I hope you're every bit as excited about it as these people in the picture are. You see how happy they look? That's how happy I want you to be about research. Now, realistically, I know most of us don't think of research as something that's that exciting, but it actually can be somewhat fun if you've chosen a topic that you're interested in. Remember, you want to learn as much as you can about this topic. You want an iceberg's worth of knowledge so that you have the tip of the knowledge, the tip of the iceberg that you can actually use to write your paper. So if you've picked something you're interested in, doing all this research will actually be somewhat enjoyable. What we're going to focus on in this lesson is the different types of sources that you might come across as you're doing research and what the pros and cons are of those different types of sources. So ones that you might run into: scholarly journals, which remember you're required to have one of, newspapers, magazines, and so on, reference sources, websites, primary sources, and then other types. So let's talk a little bit about what each one of these is and when they're useful and when they're less useful. So, scholarly journals. These are also called refereed journals or peer-reviewed journals. They are super credible. The reason for this is before anything can be published in a scholarly journal, it has to go through the peer review process, which means that experts in this particular topic are looking through it and double checking it and making sure that everything's credible. So say, for example, something was going to be published in the Journal of Asian Studies. Well, first of all, it would be written by some sort of person who is an expert in that topic. It would then be submitted to this journal and reviewed by many other experts in Asian studies before it could actually be published. So we know that if it appears in this particular journal, when it comes to the topic of Asian studies, it has definite credibility and is going to add a lot of ethos to your paper. So these are great for adding credibility. They're also good for objective information. What we mean by objective is it's not necessarily very biased. Subjective information is biased, but objective information is usually based more on facts and logic and statistics and things like that, as opposed to being based on opinion. So because peer-reviewed journals are usually research-based, they tend to be more objective, and that kind of information can be really useful for providing background information or backing up some of your claims. You're likely to find lots of details in scholarly journals, facts, figures, and so on. So when it comes to the logos part of your argument, these things can be very useful as well as contributing to the ethos part. Now, things they're not as good for: if you're looking for opinions, so if you're trying to find voices for your critical conversation section of your paper, or if you're trying to find a naysayer who might disagree with something you're saying, these particular scholarly journals are probably not going to be as good because, again, they're going to be more objective information. You'd probably want to look for something more like an opinion piece in order to get this opinionated stuff. Second of all, they're usually pretty dense and hard to read if you don't understand the subject. So, Journal of Asian Studies, not only is it written by experts on the topic, the audience is people who are experts on that topic. So it means that they already have a lot of knowledge on the subject that you probably don't. So when you sit down to read it, it's going to be a little bit challenging. The first secret word of the day is anchor. So take your time, read carefully. It's not written in Latin, but it is a little bit more challenging to read. When you want to find them, I would recommend going to a search in one of the databases like Academic Search Premier and clicking the little filters that make it so that only peer-reviewed journals show up. The librarians can help you with this, so talk to them if you need any help. Okay, our next category, we've got the periodicals, newspapers, magazines, stuff like that. So you can find good biased information in here. Subjective information like opinion pieces. If you look at the editorial section, you can find the magazine, the newspaper, or individuals involved with them giving their thoughts on something that's going on. So that's really useful when you want to show the critical conversation or when you want to address naysayers. If you look at any newspaper in America, the day after Trump says something, every newspaper in America is writing some sort of opinion piece that's either supporting what he said or saying why they think that what he said was wrong. So tons of opinion pieces are out there, so know where to find them when you need them. Newspapers and magazines are the best place to look. If you're looking for factual information, the reports are a good place to find them there. So newspapers, excuse me, I've had a bit of a cough. I know it's getting annoying. We'll try and push through it. Newspapers and magazines usually have opinion pieces, and they also have just informational sections. So if you want to find the score of the Super Bowl, you can look in the informational section. If you want to find a breakdown of why Atlanta lost the 2017 Super Bowl, the decisions that the coach made, and why the writer thought that they were bad, then you would look more in an opinion section. Newspapers and magazines are also good for fairly up-to-date information. Usually newspapers come out every day and magazines come out every week or every month. So the stuff in it is going to be relatively up-to-date, as opposed to the stuff in scholarly journals, which because they have to go through the peer review process, take a lot longer. There might not be any scholarly articles yet about the 2016 election because it only happened 6 months ago at the time that I'm actually recording this. However, newspaper articles about the election were written the day after, so up-to-date stuff can give you immediate reactions, how people feel about stuff right after it happens. Newspapers and magazines also publish a lot of interviews and profiles, so if you're looking for detailed information about individuals, it's a good place to look. Now, what they're not as good for. If you're looking for unbiased information, don't look at an editorial. The editorials are opinion pieces, so if you want objective information, it's best to look at the reports or to look at something like a scholarly journal. And then when it comes to credibility, magazines and newspapers can still have a lot of credibility. Something like the New York Times or Time Magazine is a credible source. It just doesn't quite have the credibility that a scholarly journal does, because rather than being written by experts in the field, the articles are written by reporters, which means that to show their credibility, they have to talk to a lot of other sources. So still credible, but not quite the level of credibility you would get in a scholarly journal. There's other databases at the library that you can use to find these. LexisNexis is a good one, and the librarians can help you find other ones. Reference sources. When we talk about reference sources, we're talking about things like encyclopedias, dictionaries, atlases, stuff like that. These things can be really good for general background information or definitions. They're not as good for credibility. When you back your claims up with something like an encyclopedia, it doesn't do nearly as much as if you back your claims up with a voice from a scholarly journal. So I would not recommend using your reference sources to back your claims up. I would recommend using reference sources just to provide general background information. Reference sources will not count toward your required sources for the paper. You're welcome to use them, and you should cite them on your Works Cited page, but you'll still have to meet the other source requirements. You have to also question a reference source's credibility in some cases. When you see something like Wikipedia, we're not certain who the author is, so we're not certain whether the source is credible. So always ask yourself, is this a credible source before you use it in your paper? Plenty of places to find reference sources, both in the library and online. Websites can be really, really great. They can be really, really bad. Some good things for websites, first of all, they are the absolute most update thing that you can get. If a terrorist attack were to happen right now in Washington, D.C., I would be able to go on CNN.com and probably find information about it within a minute. You can find stuff online about stuff that has happened 5 minutes ago, 1 minute ago even. So if you want up to date, a website is the very best place to look. Niche topics are another thing that's really useful on websites, that sometimes if you go to the library looking for something really specific, it can be hard to find a book about that particular thing. So say you're looking for a chocolate peanut butter cupcake recipe. Well, you probably have to search for a recipe book. You'd have to actually find a dessert book that includes stuff about cupcakes and happens to include that specific cupcake recipe. So you got to go digging through the shelves, and who knows how long it would take you to find it. On the other hand, if you type in chocolate peanut butter cupcake recipe into Google, you're going to get 1 million hits instantly. So websites are really great for finding specifics. They're also good for opinions. Everyone online has an opinion. Not every one of those opinions is credible. So make sure that you check someone's credibility before you go blindly listening to anyone who has pointed a YouTube camera at themselves. So, with that in mind, question the credibility of everything you find online. Especially if it's a .com or a .org website, you have to wonder who's behind this. Who is the author? Who is the sponsor? Who is the publisher? Who is responsible for this information that I'm reading, and are they credible? If it's .gov or .edu, that means that it's published by a government source or a college, and you can assume that they're more credible than the other types. So, depending on what you find, it may or may not be good for backing up your argument. So always question the credibility before you actually use a website. Primary sources, there's lots of different types of these. Basically, what a primary source means is you're getting the information straight from the horse's mouth, as opposed to reading somebody else's compilation of information. So if you were to read a historian's book about World War II, you would be reading a secondary source. But in that book, the author has talked to a lot of primary sources in order to write the book that he ultimately comes up with. So he probably spoke to people who fought in the war. He probably read newspaper articles from the time when the actual war was going on. He probably read letters and military reports and stuff like that. He probably looked at photographs and newsreels from the time period. All these things he's looking at are primary sources that he's going to use to compile the information into a secondary source. So it's a good idea for you to go get some primary sources too, rather than always just reading somebody else's compilations of them. So when you have interviews, research data, photos, journals from the time period, stuff like that, those things are great to back up your claims. So they can be good for getting information straight from the horse's mouth. If you're using an interview, you're speaking to a specific person, they can be really great for targeted specifics, meaning you can ask a question. If you can't find the answer to some sort of question you're looking for online, you can schedule an interview with a person, ask that exact question, and the person will answer it for you. So if you were talking to a World War II veteran, you could get his opinion of exactly what it was like to be involved in the particular aspects of the war that he was involved in. And it adds a lot of credibility. You're speaking to people who were there, who know what they're talking about, or you're looking at sources that are straight from the horse's mouth, so you know they got to be credible. Now, when it comes to comprehensive info, they're not always as great. The secondary sources are where other people have taken lots of information and brought it all together, so it's more comprehensive. Primary sources only know what they know. So if you interview a World War II veteran who was involved in the Pacific Theater, he can tell you all about the particular islands that he attacked and stuff like that, but he can't tell you anything about D-Day that he didn't learn from somebody else, because he wasn't there. He was on the other side of the world. So it's only good for what the person or what the source has actually experienced. Last, there's several other types of sources. You could find documentaries, you could find songs, YouTube videos. There's all sorts of other stuff out there. Whether they're good or bad really depends on who the author is, what the intent is, all that kind of stuff. So use your best judgment. Okay, I think that's everything we have to say about sources, the different types you might find, and why they're good and bad. I hope that you found a lot of good ones and that you'll find even more leading up to your paper's due date. Remember, if you have any questions, ask me, or questions about the research, ask a librarian. Their job, what you are paying them to do with your tuition, is to help you with this research. Their job is not just to put books back on the shelf. Their job is to help you with your research. So talk to the librarians if you want help finding some good sources. That's all for now.